did the live on the radio. Okay, right, here we go. 7 minutes past 12, Friday afternoon, 7 minutes past 7, West Coast, America time. And my good friend here, Julia, has met this gentleman from the United States, Taoist
Qigong master.
Yeah, Qigong master, yeah. None other than Kenneth, Mr. Cohen. Bloody brilliant. And I've seen his book he's just published. That's going to come out through the course of our show. And great welcome. And I now hand it over to Julia.
Hello, welcome everyone. I'm delighted to have Ken Cohen on our show today. Our show is called Dreaming the Dream, hosted by Radio FM 88 and Jeff Shaw. We feature people who are living new paradigms, different ways of being. I first read Ken Cohen's book about 30 years ago. I first saw his videos about 20 years ago, still in video format, Animal Qigong, in our local city council library, Ken. And I visited Ken in Colorado 2 years ago and was able to meet in person this beautiful man and scholar who has inspired me and countless Qigong students to understand more about what it is we're doing when we make these moves and how powerful it is. So over to Ken. Welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and how wonderful to be able to speak to my friends so far away. You know, as much as I've been so concerned about the coronavirus, and so many people have lost loved ones, and so many places here in the United States are still on lockdown. Yet I have to say, this technology, which I'd been very hesitant to use before, you probably know my reputation. People would ask me, well, do you offer any classes online? And I'd always say, no, this is the traditional way of teaching. I don't want what I teach you to become what Alfred North Whitehead called inert information. That is something stored away in a shelf or on a CD or on a DVD. I want it to still be a living tradition that carries what the Chinese call the kodre, the oral transmission, the teachings that can only come from an instructor. But, you know, one of the principles of Taoism is adaptability and adapting to change. That's a theme throughout Taoism, right from the start of the Tao Te Ching and the opening of the classic of Taoism from the 5th century BC. Lao Tzu says, Dao ke Dao, fei chang Dao. Now, even if you don't know Chinese, you can hear something interesting in that sentence. The word Dao appears 3 times in the same sentence. Well, actually, the word Tao appears more than 70 times in the course of that classic on Taoism, and each time with a different meaning. So what is Lao Tzu doing? He's teaching us through the style of the text, the content. That is one of the main themes, which is adaptability, going with the flow, as they say, adapting to change. So in accord with that, I have accepted this Luddite, has accepted the new technology. And I have to say, I've made wonderful contacts with students, with friends, with colleagues from all over the world. I've been teaching some Zoom classes, and I've had people join me from New Zealand, sometimes having to get up very early in the morning over there, and students from Germany and the UK, and of course here in the United States. So I've greatly expanded my contacts, and I feel good being of service to others in this way. And, you know, one of my core values is that if you have a gift, and I think my gift is teaching. I know some people think I'm a good writer, but I think I get the biggest response, the greatest response from my actual in-person or now Zoom classes. And part of my philosophy is that if you have a gift, the obligation is to share it, is to use it in service. And conversely, if you have a gift or a talent, whatever it is, whether you're repairing cars or an artist or a poet or an engineer, whatever your gift is, if you keep that gift inside, locked up inside because of lack of confidence, because perhaps people have told you, oh, you can't do that, or there's not enough money in that career, or you've been discouraged as a young student. If you have a gift and you don't have the courage to use it and express it and live it in the world, then that gift itself becomes a sort of power that rots inside. We become sick from our own unused gifts. So if you have a way of being of more service with what you know, with what you have to give to the world, if you can be a beacon of peace and understanding, do it. Don't keep it locked up inside.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ken. I mean, that encapsulates exactly what Qigong teaches us. It's about the Tao flowing through us and wanting to be expressed through each of us. For those of our listeners who don't really know much about Taoism or Qigong yet, let's take us back.
Sure.
If I was going to take you and me on a magic carpet and fly back all the way along your timeline to a day before you were born, where would we have to hang out? Which part of the world? And what were the circumstances that you decided to enter this earth at this time, Ken?
Are you seriously asking me if I know where I was before I was born? Now, is this
the scene? We're trying to get the scene setting.
Zen koan where they ask you what was your original face that you had before you were born, and I'm supposed to just be silent, not say anything? No.
Just say which country, what were your parents, what was the circumstances?
What were the circumstances? Well, my father, who is still alive and a healthy 94-year-old, I speak to him every day on the phone. He's living on the other side of the United States. And I miss seeing him now because of being unable to travel because of the pandemic. But he has always been involved in public health and medicine. He was a professor for a while, teaching public health at Rutgers University. He won one of the major public health awards in the state of New Jersey. So I've been exposed to the medical sciences, you could say, since I was a kid. But I went a different route. Instead of becoming a chemist, I became an alchemist. My mother, who passed on a number of years ago, she was just a very sweet, wonderful beacon of love, as I call her. And both of them were influences on me. I guess I got the kind of artistic side from my mom, and the more scientific, critical thinking side from my dad. So those are my circumstances. I never expected to be studying Chinese language, which I do speak, or Qigong, the healing practices from China, basically healing exercises and meditations. Tai Chi, some of you are wondering, well, what's the connection between Qigong and Tai Chi? Insofar as you're practicing Tai Chi for personal health and well-being, then Tai Chi becomes part, you could say, a subset of Qigong. So I never expected to be doing this. I mean, my parents were not involved in Chinese culture, and yet here I've got myself and my sibling, my younger brother. He's 3 years younger than me. Just spoke to him today, also on the telephone. And both of us involved in Chinese culture. He's the one involved more in modern Chinese culture, and I'm as he says, the walking antique. I'm involved in ancient Chinese culture. So we've got both.
What happened, Ken? How did you get drawn to China and Qigong? Take us back.
Well, this would be what in the Chinese language, which is an absolutely stunningly beautiful and interestingly complex language, where there's so many concepts for everything, from fine shades of beauty to feeling to concepts. So in the Chinese language, there's this wonderful expression, yuan fen. It means a destined occurrence, a kind of destined meeting. So I think that's what some people call the fickle finger of fate. Yeah, so that's kind of how I began. And I'll tell you this story. I'll try to make it brief. Do you know who Alan Watts is, by any chance? Yes.
I love Watts.
People that are watching and listening probably are familiar with him. He was one of the people who really introduced the West to both Taoism, Buddhism, and Asian thinking in general. In fact, there's been recently a reassessment of his role in the development of modern psychology, including humanistic psychology. Two recent issues of the International Journal of Humanistic Psychology were devoted to Alan Watts's role in Western psychotherapy. In fact, I wrote the lead article for one of those issues. So I got to know Alan Watts when I was quite young. I was about 15, 16 years old. I was attending a seminar of his in Pennsylvania. I was the youngest person there. It was a residential seminar. There was a beautiful house where people could stay, and then you get up in the morning and you listen to his wonderful lectures and practice meditation with him all day long for 2 or 3 days. And at that workshop, during a lunch break, someone was outside, standing out on the grass, doing some eerie, slow motion exercise. I had no idea what the heck it was. I mean, he was, hey, if I stand back and I show you something, will you be able to see me? Yeah, let's see if we could do this. I think that this will be interesting for viewers as well. So it looks sort of like this. And so on. So I was mesmerized. I didn't know what the heck that was. I mean, this is back 1968, just to give you a time frame. But as soon as I saw it, it was the equivalent of love at first sight. I had to do it. I had the virtue of what could be called intelligent stupidity. That is, I didn't know, even though my health was terrible. I mean, I kind of grew up on antibiotics, yet I didn't know that this was supposed to be good for health. I did it purely out of the love of Taiji. Again, I first saw it during that lunch break during an Alan Watts seminar. I did it because I felt great watching it. And the reason I'm mentioning this, the reason I'm mentioning my attitude in learning it, is sometimes if you try too hard to improve, that effort, that strong effort to improve, actually reinforces the status quo because you're driven so much to improve because of the poor idea we have of who we are now. So instead of trying to improve, it's much better to practice out of the joy of practice. That is, if you find a healing art that calls to you, you practice it. When you listen to music in order to reach a certain goal? Do you listen to music in order to reach the end of the piece or the end of the song? No, of course. Of course not. You're with the unfolding process. So that's how it was for me with Taiji. But something else very significant happened at that same workshop. And this is the other part of I think the answer to the question, what I think you were asking me about. And that is during that seminar, the theme of one of Alan Watts's lectures was music and meditation, the connection between music and meditation. And I am one of those very strange people that even during the time of the hippies, when everyone was listening to the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or the Doors or whatever, I was listening to chamber music. I was listening to the Beethoven's 9 symphonies. I was listening to Arthur Rubinstein playing the Passionata Sonata of Beethoven, or listening to Mozart. I mean, I've been a classical music nut my entire life. So when Alan Watts spoke about a connection between music and meditation, I was listening very carefully. Remember, I was only about 15 or 16 years old. And he recommended that anyone who wanted to pursue this theme further should find a book called Sound and Symbol by the German musicologist, whose last name is Zuckerkandl. Well, I went to my favorite bookstore. This was in New York City, where I was living at the time, still living at my parents' house, of course. Went to an Asian bookstore called Orientalia, and I asked the owner, I said, do you happen to have a book called Sound and Symbol? I think it's about music. And the owner said, oh, we know that book very well, but it's not by Zuckerkandl. I thought, how can I misremember a strange name like that? He said, it's not by Zuckerkandl, it's by Bernhard Karlgren. I said, I'm pretty sure the name was started with a Z. He said, no, the book Sound and Symbol is a very famous book. You're looking for the book by Karlgren. Well, I took that book. I was in a rush to get somewhere or other that day. As I'm riding on the subway back from Manhattan to Queens, another borough of New York City, which is where I was living, I opened this book and I realized that by a, quote, mistake, here's where the Chinese concept of yuan fen comes in, a destined meeting. By mistake, I had purchased one of the rarest and finest introductions to the Chinese language. I wasn't looking for a book about the Chinese language. I was looking for a book about music. But by mistake, years later, I found the book Sound and Sitter by Zuka Kandel. There is such a book. I purchased another book of the same exact title by a different author, by a Swede instead of a German, named Bernhard Karlgren, who happens to be the very famous sinologist, that is, scholar of the Chinese language, who actually reconstructed the pronunciation of ancient Chinese. So we actually have the phonetics of ancient Chinese. As a result, I can't, but people who know that phonetic system can recite a Chinese poem written in 800 AD the way it sounded back then. So the rhymes still work because Chinese poetry is generally metered and rhymed. So here was the book Karlgren had written. There were only, I think, 1,000 copies in print. By mistake, looking for a book about music, I purchased a book about Chinese language, never had planned to learn Chinese. By the time the subway ride was over, 40 minutes later, I was as hooked on the Chinese language as I was on Tai Chi, and I decided, even before I finished high school, I decided I'm going to start learning Tai Chi and I'm going to start learning Chinese. And, I realized later, after my first few years of training in Chinese, that in many ways it was part of my spiritual practice as well. That is part of my path of understanding both Buddhism and Taoism, because when you learn a language that is truly different, then you realize the way your own language structures and influences your ways of perceiving the world. So much so that an experience that doesn't fit into the conceptual framework of the language that you're raised with, you will probably deny. So what if we could see the world free of the constricting influences of categories, of language, of concepts? So again, learning Chinese was, I think, a big part not only of my understanding, hopefully more deeply, the context of Qigong and Chinese healing arts, but also perhaps opening my mind to some of the realms that the Buddhist and Taoist texts were speaking about. So that's my early story of yuan fen, of destined or fated meetings, and many proceeded from there. And believe me, I don't know why. I mean, let me tell you the story. When I was in Taiwan a number of years ago, several years ago, it was one of my first trips. I take a taxi to the hotel where I was going to be staying, and the taxi driver asks me, "你回国了？你在台湾住了多久?" He said, "Oh, you've returned home. How long have you lived in Taiwan?" I said, "I don't. I'm just visiting." But you lived in Taiwan, didn't you? I said, "No, I didn't." It seems that, what is it? Is it a past life? I don't know. I'm not sure what past lives are. To me, we're so interconnected with other people and with every form of life. We grow out of the earth like a tree grows in the forest. We're connected with all the elements. It seems too simplistic to say that my spirit somehow put on a new body, like a new set of clothes, that I've reincarnated. And yet, there seems to be these mysterious connections that people have, not just myself, but that people often find with a particular culture or period of history or community. We can't explain exactly why it is. In my case, it had nothing to do with my upbringing, and yet those connections are certainly there and recognized by my friends and colleagues. So anyway, part of my story.
Well, it's a great story, Ken. It kind of beats my going to the library and finding your video because somebody placed it there. But it was yuan fen, like you say, destiny is all. So Ken, you actually went and studied with quite a lot of the Chinese grandmasters like William Chen and V.P. Jan, Madame Gao Fu, and also the Taoist and Indian swamis. What drove you on that path?
I once, again, going back to Alan Watts, Alan once said to me, the important things are never a matter of choice. says, when you know what to do, you don't choose, you do it. There was a deep inner knowing of what I needed to do. It wasn't a matter of me thinking about it. I didn't do the usual route that most young people do of going to a university and meeting with an academic advisor. Later, I did go to university, but that was kind of after the fact, after I was already well on my path. So what drove me to that? It's not a matter of being driven. It's a matter of following. Joseph Campbell, of course. I got to know him personally. Joseph Campbell used to speak about following your bliss. So I think that's what I was doing. I'll give you another example of this because I don't know any other way to explain it. You mentioned some of my wonderful teachers, and I just love them all. William C.C. Chen and V.P. Chan and Madame Gao Fu, so many different ones. I'm going to tell you about another, a Taoist abbot. That is, he had been the head of a Taoist temple and a very refined spiritual master, you could say. He knew Chinese. He was a sort of Chinese Renaissance man, Dr. Huang Gongshi, Dr. Huang. Sometimes I call him Dr. Wang. I use the Cantonese pronunciation. I was his only apprentice during his lifetime. He accepted no other. To give you an idea of the dates, he was born in 1910. He died in 1999. I was his apprentice from 1976 until his passing in 1999.
Wow.
Mostly during those first 5 years of 1976 to 1981, because after that time, I moved to the mountains of Colorado to a small log cabin about 9,000 feet up in the Rocky Mountains. So my visits to my old teacher were at that point less frequent. How did I, and I tell you, when I think about Dr. Wang, I feel like I'm in the China of old. I'm in pre-1949, pre-communist revolution China. I'm living that old culture. Even though I wasn't alive at that time, even though I wasn't with Dr. Wang, obviously, when he was going through his, what they call yunyo, cloud wanderings to visit different masters when he was on his own learning journey. Yet my mind is so filled, maybe because I was at young, impressionable age, my mind is so filled with these magical, fantastic stories of his meetings with his teachers, of his own journey, of how he learned his lessons, and the lessons he gave me. How did I meet him? When I was living in Berkeley, or as we used to call it back then, Berkeley, California, and going to the university, I was studying classical Chinese. I was studying Taoism, Buddhism, classical Chinese history, and so forth. I had heard about this strange and interesting elderly Taoist master who was an acupuncturist, a martial artist, a Qigong master, meditation master, feng shui master, a Tibetan Buddhist master. He had been a student of the previous Dalai Lama and the previous Panchen Lama. He had been a disciple of Xu Yun, Empty Cloud, one of the people responsible for the revival of Buddhism in modern China. I heard all these stories and I thought, give me a break. It's BS. It couldn't be real. No such person exists. People are always exaggerating. They don't know enough about Chinese culture to realize that no one's going to believe these crazy stories. Maybe there is a Dr. Wang, but he couldn't have done all that. As I later found out, it was all an understatement because Dr. Wang, in addition to everything I mentioned, he was also the primary yoga teacher in southern China for 25 years. And several of the books written about yoga, several of the first books written about yoga in the Chinese language in modern times, have Dr. Wang's picture on the first page. So he started the sort of Hatha yoga yoga movement in southern China and Hong Kong. He was a student of Swami Shivananda. So again, I found out all of this was an understatement. How did I meet him? One day, I get a phone call from the owner of Shambhala Bookstore. That was the main Asian culture bookstore in Berkeley. And the owner knew me because I was always shopping, always buying books there. He said, Ken, you got to come over to the bookstore. We got in 2 really rare copies of Stephen Fuchuang's, that's the name of the author, Stephen Fuchuang, his book, An Anthropological Analysis of Chinese Geomancy. This is probably the greatest book ever written on feng shui, on how home design or how the landscape influences your health and fortune, right? Many people today know about feng shui. And in fact, this book is really one of the great books on feng shui. He told me, the owner of the bookstore said, we've already sold one of the books. We've got one left. Come on over here. You're probably going to want to buy it. So I rush over to the bookstore. And as my hand was reaching for the book, another hand was reaching for it at the same time.
Wow, what a story.
And it looked like he looked more like a British gentleman. I mean, he was obviously Chinese, but he was dressed impeccably in a beautiful suit and tie. And he walked with a cane with a round gold handle at the top. And I deferred to the elder, to the gentleman. He reached for the book. He got it, looked at it, and he looked at me because he knew I was being polite, that I had deferred to him, to the older person. He knew I was also interested in the same book. And he said, oh, you are interested in our Chinese feng shui, our Chinese geomancy? Taking a chance that he might speak Mandarin, I said, 对了，我对于风水非常有兴趣，尤其是道家的文化。I said, yes, I have a lot of interest in feng shui and in fact in Taoist culture in general. Well, he replied in beautiful Mandarin. I found out Dr. Wong spoke his original language, Cantonese, Toisan, Hakka. These are all different languages, completely different languages. Hainan Island dialect, Mandarin, English, German, and Japanese, all fluent. Sometimes I think this guy must have lived multiple lives at the same time. Who needs a past life? He lived 10 lives at once. It's amazing. So anyway, he ended up not getting the book. Just in case you're interested, I did get the book. But he gave me his card. And I saw this was the mysterious Dr. Wong I'd been hearing about. The next morning, at about 8 o'clock in the morning, uninvited, unannounced, not having even called him, being young and thinking I could do anything I wanted to do, I knocked on his door. He had given me his card. So 8 o'clock the next morning, I knocked on his door, and I had a bag of groceries and a dozen red carnations and some incense I purchased. And he opens the door and he says, oh, can I help you, young man? I said, oh, Wang Sifu. Oh, here I was already putting myself in the role of his disciple. I was being very tricky. See, I was addressing him as Wang Sifu, Master Wang, and in his own Cantonese language. I said, Wang Sifu, I met you in the bookstore yesterday. He says, yes, I remember. How can I help you? I said, well, I saw on your card that you are a Daozhang, a Taoist abbot. And as you may remember, I have a great interest in Taoism. I brought you some flowers and some fruit and some incense. I was wondering if you have an altar in your home and whether I could offer incense on your altar, arrange the flowers, put fruit out on your altar, and perhaps take you out for breakfast. He said, oh, please come in. He told me he'd lived in California, lived in the United States for 10 years, and no one had ever followed this old custom. This was the very first time. He was delighted. Well, I not only arranged the flowers and arranged things on his altar, and he watched me very carefully as I did my bows with the incense, making sure I was doing it more or less correctly. But then he very kindly showed me all of the imagery, the iconography on his altar, saying, oh, this is Taishang Laojun, this is Lao Tzu, but Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoist philosophy, as a representation of Taoist wisdom, as a kind of Taoist spirit, we call him Taishang Laojun, the Most High Lord Lao, and this is why he is represented in this way. And look behind Lao Tzu, you see Guan Yin. Guan Yin is you could say, the representation or personification of the healing power of compassion and love. And why would I have Guan Yin on my altar, a Buddhist figure on a Taoist altar? Because we believe San Jiao Gui Yi, the 3 teachings return to unity. That is, there is no reason why one form of spirituality should be exclusive of another. And in terms of old Chinese culture, we believe that Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism are all in harmony and all teach us different aspects of what it means to be a whole human being. So he gave me these wonderful lessons right from the start. And then afterwards I said, Wang Sifu, can I take you to breakfast to your favorite restaurant? He said, of course, let's go. Luckily, he didn't have any patients till about 10 o'clock that morning, because remember, he had a busy acupuncture practice. And we went out to eat, and so it proceeded 3 times a week. For the next 5 years, I was at his house all day long, cooking him breakfast or taking him out to eat, being there as a guest as he treated acupuncture patients, learning about meditation, learning how to transmit qi. That's one aspect of qigong, is not only the exercises you do for yourself, but also an actual way of assessing the energy of another person, whether it's balanced or imbalanced, and how to therapeutically use different positions of the hands or different gestures to correct that imbalance. It's not a medical discipline, it's an energy balancing discipline. I don't want anyone to think I'm practicing medicine. So I began my process of learning with him. And how is this possible? I was in a bookstore looking for a book. And then I did have the goal to go to his house the next morning and more or less invite myself. But he became one of my very dear, very important teachers. And, let me just tell you one, as I think back to the time with Dr. Wong, and I mentioned how all these stories of old China fill my head. There's also stories that he shared with me of modern times that are equally important. I remember after I had moved to Colorado and was so missing my old teacher, I flew back to California just to hang out with him, to spend some time with him, and to see some of my old students, because at that point in my life, I was already teaching Tai Chi Chuan, Tai Chi and Qigong and Chinese martial arts. So I visit my old teacher, as I had done so many times before then, take him out to his favorite restaurant. And Dr. Wong always had some gem, some wisdom to share with me. That day, as always, he said, Ken, I have become too popular. I said, Dr. Wong, that's wonderful that people recognize you, that you have the recognition that you so deserve. He said, yes, but sometimes I feel like I'm a failure as a doctor because a patient calls me who needs to see me this week, and I have to schedule them 2 weeks later because my schedule is full. That means I'm not being a good doctor. I said, it's Dr. Wong, I don't know what to tell you. And then he says, I should have known this was coming. Some lesson was coming. He said, Ken, I have found the solution. I said, what is that, Dr. Wong? He said, well, provided that they are not contagious and that they're mobile, I ask them to meet me in my favorite cafe. So when they call, they want the appointment, but my schedule is full for 2 weeks, I meet them that week in the cafe. And I'm thinking, okay, what does this have to do with healing or with acupuncture or herbal medicine? Then Dr. Wong continued. He said, so I meet with a group of my patients and I shake hands with each of them. And I'm thinking, okay. And we have tea or coffee. I'm thinking, okay. Then he tells me, invariably, that afternoon, they call me back and they say, Dr. Wong, I don't know what you did when you shook hands with me, but you can cancel my appointment. I'm feeling all better. Then the lesson for the day. He said, every contact with another human being, even something as simple as shaking a hand, a glance, has the potential for helping or harming. So we have an obligation to clean up our energy, our thoughts, develop compassion, kindness, so that every time we contact another person, that kindness is highly contagious. So Dr. Wong had this wonderful ability to heal through his presence. And as he used to say, when he would put in a needle, an acupuncture needle, he was a licensed acupuncturist, he said, when I put in the needle is not the needle. My whole body is the needle, an antenna for the universal qi, that is life energy of heaven and earth. I'm going to repeat that because he used to say this to me on several occasions. He said, when I put in the acupuncture needle, the needle is not the needle. My whole body is the needle, an antenna for the original qi or universal qi, the life energy of heaven and earth, that is the universe. So he was in touch with, and perhaps one could even say a conduit for a transpersonal or perhaps even transcendent source of healing energy that was infused, and here's the important point, infused with kindness and compassion.
Wow. And that's, I understand, what you are able to do now, because you have been recognized as an exceptional healer, and you do energy healing, and you've taken part in academic studies.
I've taken part in some studies. That's another side of it, and it's important. We're in a science-obsessed society. I don't think that science should be considered the only arbiter of truth. In that case, science becomes more a religion than anything that's even truly scientific. Science is supposed to be based on observation. Yet many people, unfortunately, will throw out the observation if it doesn't match pre-existing theory, which is the opposite of science. Science should be based on what works and on observation. So, but again, the reality is we are in a world that is based largely on science and technology. So we need to use it. And if we don't show that Qigong has measurable aspects, that is, that Qi itself can be measured on certain kinds of instrumentation, which it can be, and if we can't show that it has clinical effects, that is, it's useful to actually treat disease, well, then the scientist is not going to allow us to practice, or is just going to throw it out and say, I don't believe it. So we need the science if we're going to have that respect and be considered an important complementary therapy. And that's why I agreed to, I think this is what you were referring to being a research subject in the experiments that took place between 1983 and 1995 called Physical Fields and States of Consciousness. These occurred at the Menninger Institute, which is an outstanding institution for both biofeedback research, for hypertension, that is high blood pressure research, for psychiatry studies, and so forth. So really a great scientific institution. So what they were looking for was whether or not people who had reputations as being so-called exceptional healers. I say so-called because I think everyone has healing ability. It might be untapped, but there's no exceptional healer. There's exceptional practice and interest. You can develop your healing ability if you're interested in it. Anyway, I was chosen as one of the 9 so-called exceptional healers. Mm-hmm. And in contrast to 600 controlled experiments, that is 600 experimental sessions with people who were not known for nor claimed any particular healing ability, in contrast with those 600 experiments, all 9 of the healers, myself included, were able to produce extraordinary surges of electricity measured on the skin using sensitive voltometers and an electrode placed primarily on the ear and the ankle. And compared to the baseline reading, when each of the healers, again, myself included, when we each did our thing, in my case it was Qigong, although I was also there in my other role in indigenous medicine, which is my equal passion and field of study and experience. When each of the healers did their thing, there were voltage spikes of between 7 and about 20 volts. And you heard me correctly. I didn't say microvolts or millivolts. There were voltage spikes on the skin relative to baseline. In addition, when each of the healers, again in comparison to the so-called non-healers, were again rigorously tested in the laboratory, when each of the healers were measured as they did their intentional healing or energy healing or therapeutic touch, prayer healing, whatever their method was, they were able to produce electrical field changes. So if you're seated in a room and you've got a copper panel, copper wall in front of you, maybe about 6 feet away, a copper wall behind you, another one to the right and left, and then you've got a copper ceiling and a copper subflooring about 3 or 4 feet under where you're seated. And then to each of those copper panels, you have attached these sensitive voltometers. You can measure if there's electricity produced as an electrical field around the body of the healer when they're doing their healing work compared to when they're not intending to do their healing work. And once again, I actually have the raw data. I wasn't allowed to see the data till all of the experiments were over, because they, as with other scientists, they want to be very careful that the information not get out until it had been published in scientific journals. So I was as surprised, actually, as probably the scientists were, to find out that I produced these unusual electrical surges measured on the skin and as an electrical field, and measured in changes in brain waves. When I did Taoist meditation, where you're cycling qi through the major meridians to clear those meridians of stagnation, and stagnant qi being, according to Chinese medicine, one of the causes of disease. When I attempted to do that meditation, my brain waves not only slowed down, but the amplitude of the brain waves, that is the electrical signal, the height of the wave as it hits the shore. Yeah, if you think of waves in the ocean, you've got how slow the waves are, a quiet sea compared to an agitated sea. But you've also got if the sea is agitated, the waves are very high. Well, what scientists have found out is that if you can produce slow brain waves, you're in a more relaxed state. You're more intuitive. You're more in touch with your intuition. But if at the same time, you can have both slow brain waves, but waves that peak very high because there's high electrical content, then more of your brain is doing the same thing at the same time.
So you've got the yin and then the yang.
Yes.
The yin in the space and stillness, and then the yang is in the peak of the wave.
Yang is in the peak, or another way to look at this is in very easy to understand terms. What I was able to show is that while practicing Qigong, my brain was in a more integrated state. Different parts of the brain were working together, and that Qigong had a definite effect on intuition, on being more awake to one's dreams, you could say, very much in harmony with the theme of this program, and being more in touch with who you are. So again, I was not expecting science to validate what I sensed intuitively about Qigong, but I was happy to see that there were things that in fact could be measured.
That actually is a great lead into one of the questions I had for you. And you've probably seen that a lot of people are excited about miraculous Qigong healing on cancer patient videos that are being circulated by the Manifest Your Life crowd. When I get asked about that, I kind of, whether I can do that, I kind of look at them blankly, because as you know, when you go to hospital in China, you can either go for the Western medicine or for the Qigong medicine, and they will diagnose you, they'll give you herbs, they'll give you acupuncture, but they'll also teach you Qigong, and they'll also do Qigong with you. So when you do Qigong healing, Ken, and I know when we last spoke that you're actively involved at this point in time as a service to community. So what exactly is it that you are doing? Are you sending them qi to top up their reserves, or are you cycling qi through to unblock them?
So thank you for that question. My primary role is really as an educator. I mean that's, I think, my strength. That's my primary role. I love teaching Qigong, and I've seen wonderful, wonderful results. People learning to better manage their own health through Qigong exercises and meditations. So let's say someone has a particular health challenge. For example, I work a lot with people with Parkinson's and MS, and People with cancer, I can't say I'm going to treat cancer, but I can say I can help them have energetic balance. And we hope there may be some healing side effect. Yeah. So let's say somebody comes to me for an individual session as opposed to being in a class. Usually those sessions will last about an hour. And generally the first half hour to 40 minutes will be a personalized Qigong routine that is based on what their challenge is, what their needs are. I have a sort of pharmacopoeia of Qigong exercises and systems that I have learned and practiced for many years. So in the same way that your doctor, your physician might have a PDR, physician's desk reference, that if they've forgotten what medication to use for a particular condition, they can look it up. So I have my own internal pharmacopoeia of not, in this case, herbs or Western drugs, but rather Qigong exercises and meditations to address different types of problems. So we'll work together on some Qigong. I want to give them skills that they can continue developing, continue improving their health and well-being on their own. And then the last half hour, between 20 minutes and a half an hour, and I usually get the sense of it as I'm working with them, how long the treatment needs to be. I'll take out a massage table. They lie down on the massage table, fully clothed, and the treatment is done without physical touch. There's some specific areas of the body where you hold your hands over that region where you can assess whether the qi is excessive or insufficient, whether it's too hot, too cold, whether it's stagnant, whether it's cheesy or flowing too easily, whether it's like coarse like sandpaper or smooth like silk. There are so many different qualities of the qi that we learn to look for and to sense, and that I learned through my teacher and mentor, Dr. Wong. And once I've done my assessment, and again, for those of you that are energy healers, please be careful in your terminology. Don't use the term diagnosis. At least in the United States, you can get into a lot of trouble because we're not practicing medicine. We're practicing energy healing. So after my energy assessment, then there are specific therapeutic gestures used for treatment, as well as some that are used for a general wellness treatment, where you might be, for example, stimulating the flow of qi through the major meridians or through particular acupuncture points. So that's basically the treatment. When we finish, we spend a few minutes processing and talking about it. I ask the client if there have been any questions. And that's basically it. And I've had wonderful, wonderful feedback from people. I love doing this kind of work. But again, if I think of myself, I don't really think of myself as a healer. I mean, I've been accused of that, but I think of myself as a teacher and educator.
Thank you for that. Yes.
Can I just step in there? Long way to go with flowers and groceries to knock on your door for breakfast from Australia.
What was that?
It's a long way to go. Knock on your door.
Yes. Oh, I've had clients come from Australia.
Have you?
Yes, absolutely. I had a client a number of years ago who had MS and was highly symptomatic. Symptoms, extraordinary relief from her symptoms within 10 days of regular Qigong practice. At first, she was walking with a walker. Again, she was highly symptomatic, so her hands were wobbling all the time. Her body was shaking, and there was really exceptional effect. I've had clients come from China, from mainland China, one woman with a brain tumor who'd heard of me because of websites that describe my work in the Chinese language. And of course, I didn't make any claim to be treating her tumor or cancer or any of that. I said, we'll work on energy balance, but there was some wonderful benefit. I have students regularly come in from Europe. I have a student from India who comes back to the U.S. every now and then. I mean, she's from India, but she visits the U.S. to do sessions with me. So people do indeed come from all over the world, both for the workshops. Well, now it's Zoom classes, but for the in-person, used to be for the in-person workshops and classes, as well as individual sessions. Now, I should tell you, I'm not able to transmit the qi through the, okay. Maybe there are people who are very suggestive. Okay, we could try this. Oh, sure. Hey, people are too gullible. In my opinion, sorry to tell you this, public, but some people are just too gullible. There's going to be people out there who are going to be going like that, and they're going to be going, oh my God, he's so powerful. That's just suggestion. That's you putting too much power into another person. Please reclaim your own power. There may indeed be some people that can transmit chi through Zoom and so forth, but what I do is I work as an energy healer in person with people. However, through Zoom classes, individual or group, I can teach practices you can do for yourself to better maintain your own health and well-being.
So Ken, on that subject of Zoom classes, and I did get up at 3:00 in the morning last week to attend one of your classes, but I'm very excited about this new form of Qigong that you're teaching, because my introduction to you was actually through animal play Qigong, which I still love, because it just gives us the opportunity to have fun and not be ourselves and tap into that sacred energy that that animal represents. And I was really interested to see that you picked the orca whale, because I'm still scarred by Richard Attenborough's scene in where the orca whale is like killing some baby something or other. But you picked orca whales. So tell us about the orca whale and the orca whale Qigong.
Well, the orcas, first of all, they're called orca whales, but they're actually very closely related to dolphins. And like dolphins, they are very, very family oriented, very communicative. They work in groups for hunting. So they hunt in packs. They're often called the wolves of the sea. And they've been spiritual guides, you could say, and teachers to people that have contact with ocean life since the beginning of human history, probably. However, I should tell you, orca is not one of the traditional styles of Qigong. The style you mentioned, Julia, earlier is the 5 animal frolics of Hua Tuo. That was one of the first Qigong methods that I had learned. It's the earliest Qigong choreography still practiced today, and those are exercises based on the crane, the bear, the monkey, the deer, and the tiger. And as you could imagine, you develop the kind of grace and balance and lightness of the crane, the strength and rootedness of the bear, and so forth. That dates to the 2nd century AD. And it's those 5 animals I still practice. I love it. I remind people that when you do these animal exercises, you are connecting with the way people understood the animals who still lived with them 2,000 years ago. Remember, Hua Tuo, who created the 5 animal frolics, he didn't go to a zoo to imitate the animals. We forget that. Animals were part of the human experience back then. Well, where does orca come in? All right, this sounds a little mystic, weird, but I'm just going to be very frank and tell you what happened. About 20 years ago, I was on a ferry, an overnight ferry from Seattle to Juneau, Alaska. I forget now if it was 1 or 2 nights. And early in the morning, I got up to go outside on the deck, as usual, to do my Qigong practice. And it's a passage, the inside passage, the waterway is between 2 land masses. So the sea is very calm there, very easy to do Qigong outdoors on a large boat, on a ferry boat. And as I'm practicing, I see some orcas not far away, and they communicated to me. I heard in my mind, I heard them say that there are so many forms of Qigong based on life on the land or in the sky, such as the eagle. But they said to me, we have been neglected. There's no Qigong based on the whale or on the orca. And I sensed in my body the type of movements they were doing, and I began to imitate them. And then I started going on whale watching expeditions frequently and reading everything I could about orcas. And over a 10-year period, I developed while following the principles that I knew from other established Qigong animal styles, I developed a simple choreography of healing orca whale Qigong exercises. Then I was still hesitant to teach it. I mean, this to me is a big responsibility. Here I was creating a new style of Qigong. This seems presumptuous. I visited a friend of mine who's a marine biologist who lives in Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. And I showed him each of the whale movements that I had developed. And I said, I would like you to tell me which whale behavior each exercise is based on. And he correctly identified every single one of them, even the one that was based on some newly observed behavior where the orcas will sometimes swim upside down by a pebbly ocean floor to rub their backs and scratch their backs on the pebbles. He even identified that movement as I did it. Well, since the orcas I felt had taught me, and I was following Qigong principles that I'd been training since the 1960s, and with the encouragement now of an actual marine biologist, I decided, okay, now I think I can start teaching it. So I allowed the exercises to mature more than 10 years before I began to share them. And that, by the way, is a traditional approach to these practices. I hate to tell you, but please don't learn something in a single class or in a weekend and then call yourself a teacher. I'm sorry, but that's not how it works. Let me ask you this. Okay, I know some people only want me to be positive. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be entirely positive. That's being unreal. Imagine if you went to a medical doctor and the doctor said, you know, I have learned how to use amoxicillin and how to prescribe it. I don't know anything else in medicine, but I know how to do that. So what exactly is your problem? And I'm going to treat it. You would not want to go to a doctor that only knew how to use one medicine and had only learned that by a class in maybe amoxicillin or penicillin for a particular kind of infection, for strep throat, let's say. No, you want someone who has gone through their undergraduate training, they've gone through the 4 years of medical school, and ideally they have some life experience as well, and they have some clinical experience so they can sense what medicine is needed for what patient. So don't expect to learn Qigong in a weekend. You can learn it for your own well-being. You can learn plenty of Qigong in one day, in one class. But don't teach it till it's had a chance to cook, to mature inside of you. It's not that every Qigong is going to take 10 years. I took 10 years because I felt I was given the responsibility of creating a new Qigong. I want to make sure I had it right. Most Qigongs, you're going to take at least 2 or 3 years before you're ready to teach. With Taiji, Taiji takes about 3 to 5 years, I would say. Something like the 5 animal frolics, you can really get it down. I mean, you can learn the techniques, the skills in about 2 or 3 months, but I would say practice it for a couple of years before you start teaching it. And I mean, it's simple. You ask your teacher, hey, I'm doing it for 2 years. You think I'm ready to teach? Just be frank. Say, am I ready to teach? And if you got it, your teacher will say yes. So I'm mentioning that because there's a saying in Chinese that if you try to paint a tiger, but you don't hold the brush, the maobi, the Chinese calligraphy or art brush properly, then instead of it looking like a tiger, it will look like a dog. Now, there's nothing wrong with dance. What they mean by that is you need to learn the skill first. Need to master your musical scales, learn to play some basic musical pieces, and keep working on your Chopin sonata or Mozart sonata. And then after a couple of years, you may be ready to perform. But you're not going to all of a sudden learn for the first time a Rachmaninoff piece and then perform it a week later. Of course not. So why would we do that with Qigong?
So it's the music.
Just a story about the orcas. I was in Vancouver and I went out to Vancouver North, and there's a bay there where they take the ferries across to Vancouver Island. And there's this beautiful statue of an orca whale with a young boy. And there's a story of how that orca came in and saved that young boy from shipwreck.
Wonderful.
Because the boy called out to him, like telepathically.
And I've heard of other stories like that as well. A dear friend of mine was asleep in a boat, and the boat broke loose from its mooring when a typhoon came in. He found himself adrift at sea with high waves, realized the boat was going to capsize. He was probably a mile from shore. It was nighttime. He couldn't see the shore, didn't know which way he could swim. All he had was a lifesaver. He jumps off the boat, and two dolphins come over to him. This is for real. He grabs hold of the dolphins. They swim him into shore. These things do indeed happen.
And that's, I think, what gives us hope, especially in this time, to know that the animal spirits and nature, there is harmony. They know what we're doing. They help us when we fall into the water.
He's always there. I mean, this pandemic is so terrible. It's such a challenge. It's causing so much pain. But nature is still there. We can still find peace, comfort, healing energy, inspiration, as all of our ancestors, no matter what continent we're on, as all of our ancestors have done throughout human history. We can find that peace, beauty, healing energy directly in nature.
You mentioned Dr. Wong having his acupuncture clinic. Is he doing that in conjunction with the Qigong movements as well?
No, he wasn't. He did Qigong just for himself. He did both Qigong and Chinese martial arts. He did Qi healing during the acupuncture. That is, he would sometimes put a needle in the acupuncture point and then hold his hand in what's called the Zhenji sword fingers, which is the index and middle finger extended, the other fingers bent into the palm. And then you use that to give a more or less laser, that is focused beam of energy. And he'd hold his sword fingers over the acupuncture needle, perhaps a few inches away from it. And then particular gestures with his hand would cause either heat or cold to enter the needle, or would cause more energy or less energy to go through the needle. Those kind of things I did learn from him, and that he did practice. So he did Qi healing as part of the acupuncture, but he didn't teach Qigong per se. He did the Qigong exercises for himself.
And you yourself, you yourself are a Taoist master, right? And you do readings
to me, that's an
Qigong.
Yeah, to me, that's an honorific. That is, I would feel presumptuous to call myself that. In fact, the title that I use is Lao Shi. Most students call me, they don't call me Ken or Ken Cohen, they call me Gao Lao Shi. Gao is simply my last name in Chinese, and Lao Shi just means teacher. It can mean professor, but it's the same word you would use for an elementary school teacher, for a dance teacher, an art teacher, a professor at the university. It's just a generic term for teacher. So they're calling me Teacher Cohen or Teacher Ken, Gao Lao Shi. As far as master, yeah, some people consider me that, they call me that. But again, I like to think of those kind of terms as an honorific that a community confers on you in recognition of knowledge, ability, and service.
Well, you've definitely given us knowledge and service and dedication. I guess just on a closing note, I'm really interested from the Taoist perspective where you think humanity is at this point in time in the cycle. I know Buddhists have their idea about the cycle and where we're at, and the New Age movement has its ideas too about where we're at. But what would you as a Taoist teacher say or observe with the audience today?
Well, I think we have to live in such a way that we are creating a kind of fulfillment of positive dreams and goals. That is, we can't become pessimistic because of the news and politics and so forth. So, where is the world headed? Let me give you this analogy. If the east is where the sun rises and where we have new inspiration, new light, then we are kind of in the place in between where the sun sets and the sun rises. I would say we're at a kind of critical balance point. And unless humanity is willing to remove some of those buffers that stand between us and the natural world and be willing to sacrifice somewhat for the common good, to consume less, to show more respect for the earth and for each other, to think less about money and material goods. Unless that happens, I don't see how we can move towards the east, towards that new light. So we have to do our part. I don't know of any, specific prophetic tradition that's talking about these times right now within Taoism. I met with some outstanding Taoist masters and I Ching masters, diviners in Taiwan just this past October. And I didn't hear from anyone any predictions about some new earth or a new age, or that we're all entering higher consciousness. I mean, if anything, the science side of my brain says, hey, the human brain seems to be shrinking because evolution is spurred by the challenges presented by nature. And if we are only interacting not with nature, but with objects of our own creation, then lacking that challenge, the brain decreases, not increases, in complexity. So if we really want the human brain to evolve and continue evolving, we need nature. We need wild nature to survive. That was the original inspiration behind Taoism. I'll conclude with maybe the best answer to your question. Again, I don't have any prediction per se, but if we want to create a beautiful future, I would say the best answer can be found in a very simple phrase from the Tao Te Ching, the classic of Taoism, China's indigenous spiritual philosophy, 5th century BC. And this sentence says, Ren fa di, di fa tian, tian fa dao, dao fa ziran. People follow the earth. That's the first part of this translation. People follow the earth. The earth follows heaven. Heaven follows the Tao. The Tao follows what is so of itself. It's a fantastic phrase. People follow the earth. That means we need to be good caretakers for our home. Not because the earth is sacred and spiritual, it is, but it's very simply our home. So people follow the earth. Earth follows heaven. Means that we also need to pay attention to developing our spirituality. And when Lao Tzu says heaven, he's also referring to the stars, that the stars are our ancient teachers of the importance of silence. There's always noise on earth. There's always a sound. Right now, it's evening here in the United States, and I can hear the frogs singing. It's wonderful. I can hear a little bit of a breeze moving through the trees. It's wonderful. But when we look up at the night sky, at least the way it used to be before there were planes and satellites and everything else, it was our teacher of silence. So Lao Tzu says, follow the earth, follow the heavens. Remember the message of the silence and beauty of nature, the silence and beauty of the stars. And that in turn leads us to the Tao, to our spirituality. And to what grows of its own accord, what is so of itself, rather than created through human manipulation, control, or artifice. So if we're going to create a beautiful world, we need to follow nature, learn from nature, and be examples of nature's healing power.
Thank you for that. So it is. So I think that is a perfect way for us to leave, not detract from that last explanation, Ken. For those of you that have been watching us now or in the future, please feel free to connect with Ken Cohen via his website and Facebook details, with Jeff from Radio FM 88 Australia. It's a radio station that is dedicated to raising the collective consciousness by playing beautiful music, or myself on mindsies.com.au. So from all three of us, salutations, perfect balance, and joy, spending this time together with all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.